Well, hang on.
So,
let me
so
just
as you've said,
just ask you this about capital expenditure then, because we've discussed this in the past. So, what's the makeup of nuclear by 2050 in terms of the electricity grid? Where did you land there?
So we're saying it's 38, around 38%
right.
of our grid. Now, if you recall the scare campaign that Labor ran and said, we're going to spend all this money, billions of dollars, and only have 4% of the grid. I mean, this is why this delusional and desperate attack by Labor looks more and more insane every day, is that the reality is this will give us the baseload power we need. We'll have just over 50% being in renewables, and gas will make up the balance. And that gives you a mixture, and that gives you a mix. That doesn't put all your energy eggs in one basket. But what you need to do in the short term is actually bring more supply on and supply quickly. And the quickest way to do that, beyond renewables, beyond new coal, new nuclear, is actually gas. That's the only way that you can increase supply and bring down prices in the short term. That is simple physics, it's simple economics, and that's what, unfortunately, Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen have plundered for the last two and a half years and sent your energy bills up instead of down $275.
Yep, okay, so 38%, big spend for that, but you're right, it's more than the 4% that Labor...
It's a less spend than Labor.
Yep, sure, but you're still going to have, you said 50% renewables in the makeup. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket, as you say, but you're still going to need to spend money on transmission lines, aren't you, for that 50%?
No, not as much. Because
not as much, of course, but you still need to spend some, don't you?
Well, we're going to spend 44% less of Australian taxpayers' money. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. That's a big return to the Australian taxpayer that they're not going to have to repay in their energy bills. I would have thought that's a positive thing, and because we're not going to need the transmission lines, because we're going to replace the coal-fired power stations where they are and reuse the transmission lines that are there from them, because we're going to build nuclear power plants where those coal-fired power stations are.
Sure.
We're already at about 34% is around renewables at the moment. Much of those being done near existing transmission lines, which has reduced that cost. So if we can minimise the amount of transmission lines, that's where you save. And you've got to understand this.
Yeah, but David, you're minimising, sure, but you're still doing 50% of what Labor is committed to. And what's the cost of that? Around 50 to 100 billion?
Well, exactly. It's 44% less. They're $594 billion. We're just over $330 billion in being able to have a mixture in our grid. We give reliability and a cheaper, affordable energy system. That's common sense. Why wouldn't we use all the sovereignty of our resources here? You're not going to have to pay as much under the coalition. That's pure mathematics. No one can defy that, no matter how big a scare campaign.
But when does that?
Much of those when
does that level out? When does that cost level out? And when do people get cheaper power bills? Because I know you still don't have the gas. You yet to announce the gas strategy short term. It's all going to hinge on that, isn't it? If you want to bring people's power bills down in the short term.
Well, it is. It's about supply. That's a simple principle of economics that stood the test of time, that Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese have tried to defy, and Chris Bowen. The reality is the only way to get more supply into the system quickly is gas. Because much of the capital infrastructure has already been put in place into the East Coast. And that's how you actually do that. But what's happened is they have created an environment where no one's been prepared to drill holes for domestic supply. And it's only been in the last couple of weeks that Senex have had the courage to come forward and to drill holes in my own electorate. And I'm proud to say my own electorate is probably the one that is actually delivering much of the East Coast gas to this country at the moment. And there's huge opportunity, and that's why Beetaloo is also important, not just for export, but for domestic supply.
I mean, with the government running essentially nuclear power plants, the criticism has been that does lock out investment and is anti-liberal and it discourages bigger investors. Do you accept that's the quid pro quo here?
No, my priority is a reliable, affordable electricity grid for Australians, not for big corporates. The people who are running up and down at the moment are those that have...
But the taxpayers are going to pay rather than private business, right? If you do that, there's a quid pro quo.
No, they're going to pay. They're going to pay, and they're already paying for big corporates. And those that are protesting so much are those that have their own personal interest in renewables like Simon Holmes Court and Twiggy Forrest. I'm not worried about their family. I'm worried about Australian families who are struggling to actually be able to afford dinner tonight because their energy bills are too high. The thousands of Australians who are on hardship clauses with their energy provider, I'm worried about their families. I'm not worried about big billionaires making billions out of us.
Yep.
Australians should own our grid, and we should actually have affordable power. We should have some of the cheapest power in the world. We've sovereignty of all our resources. Yet we have let an ideology get in the road of the practical reality, all for these billionaires to tell us how we live while they profit from it.
Sure.
Bad luck. Time's up. Some common sense needs to prevail, and we're going to take ownership of this. That's what strong leadership is about. That's what Peter Dutton and I intend to give the Australian people as an alternative at the next election.
So those families that you talk about, if you win the next election, do they get cheaper power in the next term, at least?
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what we'll be announcing in terms of how we'll achieve that. We want to be upfront and honest, and that's why it was important to model with Frontier. But we need to also be honest about how we can, in the short term, bring back some of that pressure that Australians are feeling from their energy grid. And when you look at it in a common sense way, the only way that you can reduce bills is to increase supply. And the only way you can do that quickly is to bring on gas, and to bring gas on quickly into the market. That is pure basics economics that even I learned at Chinchilla State High in grade 8 about demand and supply. Good old Chinchilla State High at least taught me one thing.
Okay. The other criticism is that Frontier Economics has basically said we'll be using less energy, which is just not believable. And you haven't taken into account things like perhaps we do attract bigger manufacturing companies and a bigger sector. What about AI? Is it really believable that we'll be using less energy, or be going up at a lesser rate by 2050?
Well, I'll correct you on that. It's not saying that we'll use less energy. What it's saying is that we'll have a progressive increase in our energy use, but we won't have total electrification of our economy. That's what Labor's saying, is that 97% of us will be driving electric cars.
Okay.
Let me tell you, they're 1% of current sales at the moment. They're telling us there won't be gas cooktops. You won't have a choice on that. They're telling us that they're going to use about 20% of the grid to do green hydrogen, when even our good mate Twiggy Forrest walked away from billions of dollars worth of government subsidy saying it's all too hard and it's all too costly, I'm not going to do hydrogen. So the assumptions around what they're talking about are heroic. But even if you model that, and you model that in the step change model, we are still over $100 billion cheaper than Labor's model. So we're not saying there's less energy. We're saying that the economy will have a mixture and we'll have a balance. And we're not going to tell Australians how to live. We're going to give them the options. We're going to live up to our international commitments, but we'll do it a uniquely Australian way. And we're not going to have billionaires tell us how to live. Bully for them, they can afford it. But I'm more worried about the families that can't afford it. And so the modelling has looked at all alternatives. And even on their modelling, we're cheaper on the model they want to go down of total electrification of our economy.
Yeah.
I think there's a better way, and I think Australians should get to choose.
If the facts change, will you change? I mean, green hydrogen not viable now anywhere, not economically viable. If that changes, will you change? And will you be adaptive?
Well, that's why you need a mixture in your grid that's zero emissions. Nuclear is zero emissions, as is renewables. So,
but green hydrogen, if that does come online, would you embrace it?
Yeah. But what you've got to do is set the fundamentals to be able to support any changes.
Right.
You can't
so
do
you're
that with
happy to leave that up to the private sector. Would you have any incentives like Labor did, but only when it's produced?
Well, you can't keep using Australian taxpayers' money to subsidise industries.
I know, but when on green hydrogen, to be fair, David, what Labor was doing is they put an incentive in place in the last budget, said if you can produce this at a cost-effective rate, we'll subsidise that. I mean, that's only a subsidy on success. Is that a bad way to do things?
Yeah. No, what's a better way to do is to have the fundamentals that attracts long-term investment in manufacturing. That's proper industrial relations policy, and that's about reliable, affordable baseload power that underpins it. So to give you a perfect example, you're going to need 3 times the energy generation to have manufacturing in this country. Tomago has 950 megawatts a year to keep it going. To go an all renewables approach with some batteries that'll only last 30 minutes, so you need a lot of batteries. You're going to need 3 gigawatts of energy generation. Just imagine the wind turbines, solar panels and transmission lines across the Hunter Valley if we go down Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese's path of an all renewables approach.
You're still going to have transmission lines though, aren't you, David? I mean, and I know you've talked about the farmers that suffer here in prime agricultural land. You're still going to have the transmission lines. You're still going to have to build them, even if you're only doing 50% renewables and half of what Labor's doing. I mean, you've got to be upfront to those farmers and on that prime agricultural land. You're still going to require those transmission lines, aren't you?
But we've been very honest. We're going to need transmission lines, but we're going to need a lot less. Need a lot less than what Labor will.
How do you decide where they go?
We're having half. Well, and that's through the process of making sure that we send those investment signals about the energy mix that we have. And that'll obviously be investments that are made, and we work with state governments because we don't have the control of the planning pen onshore. That's owned by the states. The states have that responsibility. So all we do at a federal level is create that environment. We do have call-in powers offshore, but onshore it's around local and state government approvals. But what we do at a federal level is set those investment signals. And that's why many are condemning us at the moment. Those that are condemning us are those that have personal vested financial interests in an all renewables approach. They're not pure in the end game here, because if you want the end game, we actually will have a cleaner energy grid than an all renewables approach. And so I don't see why anyone's condemning our plan, because at the end, our energy grid will be cleaner than an all renewables approach, and yet we provide a mix and we're cheaper.
After 2 decades of the energy wars, I'm not sure anyone comes to this debate with much purity, I've got to say, David. But look, a pleasure to have you on the show this morning. A pleasure to have you on AM Agenda. I love that you show up. I love our chats. And people think we're fighting all the time, but we actually quite like each other. Merry Christmas, David. Enjoy the rest of your week. I don't reckon it'll be a very restful Christmas for you, but do what you can.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Have a great one, mate.